It was the kind of library most towns have, a solid brick building that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. It wasn't fancy, but it was always open late, and there were usually plenty of empty tables tucked away in the back. I spent a lot of time there that semester, trying to catch up in my courses after falling behind. Honestly, I was mostly going for the quiet, and to avoid being alone in my apartment while I studied, it felt safe somehow. The library smelled like old paper and dust motes. Not a bad smell, just present. I was trying to get through this reading on Keynesian economics, honestly just staring at the page. It was Tuesday late, which meant Walt was usually there. He always had this stack of books he'd be reorganizing. I say reorganizing, but it wasn't the Dewey Decimal System or anything. It was his own thing. He was there tonight, of course, and I noticed it again. He'd moved the textbook I'd been using for my econometrics class, not just to a different shelf, but slotted it between a biography of Marie Curie and a book on medieval heraldry. Okay, weird. But then I looked closer. He'd also put the solutions manual, the one I'd borrowed from Dawn, right next to it. How would he even know I had that? Dawn and I hadn't talked about it at the library. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he overheard us. Maybe he just guesses what people are studying. He's an older guy, probably taught before. He knows the types of books students need. It was still unsettling. I shifted my focus back to Keynes, but I kept glancing over. He didn't seem to be looking at me exactly, more like scanning the spines. Then he pulled out a slim volume, a really old edition of something about game theory. The same edition my professor Ilse had mentioned in class, saying it was ridiculously hard to find, and he placed it directly on top of my reading list. I swear, he didn't even look up, just placed it. It felt deliberate, like he was building something, like he was helping. It was strange, but maybe it wasn't malicious. Maybe he was just trying to be helpful in his own eccentric way. Maybe he was a retired professor trying to mentor students anonymously. It was a comforting thought. Honestly, a little creepy, but comforting. I started taking the bus to school instead of walking. It wasn't about the cold, though it was getting colder. It was him, Walt. Every time I used the library, he was there, and he was always anticipating, not like staring at me, but more like he'd already be positioning himself or have the book ready before I even reached the shelf. It was infuriating and unsettling. One day, I decided to go to a different library branch. It was further, but it was bigger and busier. I figured I could blend in. I took the bus and walked the extra 10 minutes. I felt okay until I saw her, Bette. She worked at the reference desk. She'd helped me once finding an article for a paper. She looked up as I approached and smiled. It was a normal smile, but then she said, "Looking for anything specific? Perhaps something on applied game theory?" My throat closed up. That book. Walt hadn't just put it on my pile. He'd communicated with someone. She hadn't seen me at the other library. I'd never spoken to her about game theory. Never. I mumbled something about needing to browse and walked away, my heart hammering. It had to be a coincidence. A strange, improbable coincidence. Maybe Ilse had mentioned me to her, bragging about a student interested in the topic. I started avoiding the library altogether. Studying in the student union was loud and distracting, but at least I felt safe. Then I got an email from a financial aid counselor I'd never corresponded with, Pavel. It detailed a new grant opportunity, seemingly perfect for my situation. It even mentioned my specific research interests. The email included a link to an application form. It asked for a lot of information I hadn't given to the school. I deleted it, but that night I dreamt of rows and rows of books meticulously rearranged, and Walt, smiling, but not at me. I kept deleting the emails from Pavel. They kept coming. Different subject lines, always tailored. Supplemental funding for advanced research, then urgent, grant application deadline approaching. Each one felt knowing, like he already knew I was ignoring him. I started checking my student account obsessively, looking for unauthorized access. Nothing. I even went to the IT department, explained the situation to a guy named Glenn. He shrugged and said it was probably just a marketing thing, a glitch in the system. He ran a scan and said everything looked secure. Then yesterday, I got a call from Alma in the bursar's office. She said my tuition bill had a discrepancy. A large overpayment applied as a credit. She wanted to verify my bank details. My actual bank details, not the ones on file with the university. I almost hung up, but she sounded so official. Concerned even, I gave her the last 4 digits to confirm, just to get her off the phone. This morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. Alma sent me your information. Need to discuss the grant. Meet me at the old music building at 12. No name, just that. The old music building is abandoned. They started construction on a new science center there, but it's stalled. It's fenced off. I went. I don't know why. It was stupid. I just needed to know. The gate was unlocked. Inside, a man was waiting. Not Walt. Not anyone I'd seen before. Vito. He was holding a folder, my name handwritten on the cover. He didn't say anything, just opened the folder and showed me a printout of my bank statement. Every transaction highlighted. He said very calmly, "Someone's been very generous with your education." Then he smiled, and I knew with a sudden sickening clarity that this wasn't about the grant. It was about the money. Someone was laundering money through my financial aid, and they were watching me. I went straight to campus security. It felt wrong. Even walking into the building, like I was stepping into a part of the machine. I told them everything. About Walt, about the librarian Bet, about Vito and the bank statement. I even mentioned the IT guy Tobias and how he'd offered to optimize my student account. They listened mostly. A young officer, Glenn, took notes. He kept asking about the money, about where it was coming from, if I knew anyone involved in anything illegal. He kept circling back to the abandoned music building. He said there'd been complaints about students trespassing, squatters. He asked if I'd met anyone there. It felt like he was accusing me of something. He said they'd look into it, file a report. It wasn't reassuring. It felt procedural, like checking boxes. I changed my banking password that night. I closed my account and opened one at a credit union across town. I stopped going to the library. I started ordering all my books online. I even switched my usual coffee shop. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Then I remembered something. When I'd first started having trouble with the financial aid website, I'd called the help desk. A woman named Alma had walked me through it. She'd been oddly thorough. She asked a lot of questions, not just about the website, but about my courses, my schedule. I looked her up on the university directory. She wasn't listed as a help desk employee. She was a research assistant in the psychology department. Specifically, she worked with Dr. Ilse, who specialized in behavioral studies, and she'd published several papers on observational learning, on conditioning. That's when it hit me. They weren't laundering money. They were studying me, testing something. It was still terrifying, but almost academic. Like I was a lab rat in some twisted experiment. It felt cleaner than money laundering, less dangerous. I was so wrong. It's been years. I still think about it. Not constantly, but it surfaces. Usually when I'm dealing with anything remotely bureaucratic, or someone new, someone offering help. After everything with Ilse and Alma, I transferred departments. I finished my degree and got a job. I moved cities. I tried to forget the way Alma's eyes didn't quite meet yours when she was talking. I also tried to forget the way Vito always knew exactly which questions to ask to make you feel off balance. For a while, I thought it was just about the university. Some kind of rogue social experiment gone sideways, contained within the system. It was a weird, unethical study. I even convinced myself it was some kind of elaborate hazing ritual for students deemed promising. It sounds ridiculous now. I remember one time, a few months after graduating, I was setting up a new bank account. The woman Bet was overly friendly, too friendly. She kept repeating my address back to me slowly, like she was memorizing it. And the questions, they weren't about my income or my credit score. They were about my routine. Did I travel often? What did I do on weekends? It was the same, that feeling, the subtle pressure. So I just stopped answering. I thanked her, took my paperwork, and left. I canceled the application and went to a different branch. I haven't used that bank since. Now, without even realizing it, I always ask for a second teller to verify anything important, any new account, any large transaction. I don't even think about it. I just do it. It's automatic. I was at the grocery store checkout yesterday, and the cashier, a young guy named Ren, was having trouble scanning my loyalty card. He asked for my phone number to manually enter it, And before I could even process his request, my hand was already reaching for my wallet, pulling out a pen and circling my number on the receipt, just in case. It's strange revisiting this now, years later, because things really did settle back to normal. I have a different apartment, a different routine, and honestly, it barely crosses my mind anymore. But a friend mentioned needing help with her coursework, and it all flooded back. The feeling of unease, I suppose. So I figured it was time to write it down, mostly to organize my thoughts and get it out of my head once and for all. The chipped mug warmed my hands. I'm still getting used to this kitchen. Honestly, everything feels smaller than I remember. I was going over the week's grocery list, trying to remember if I'd picked up enough coffee. That's when I noticed it again. The intercom. I'd waved to the camera downstairs when I came in last night, said good evening like I always do. There was no response. I figured Yolanda was probably busy, maybe a new shift schedule. But this morning, I said good morning. Nothing. I even waited, leaning closer to the speaker, just in case. Silence. It's weird, but not alarming. It's just a building, right? Staffing changes happen. Maybe they're having trouble keeping people. I walked over to the window, looked down at the entrance. It seemed normal enough. A delivery guy was dropping off packages, and a woman was walking her dog. There was no sign of anyone at the front desk. Then I remembered Zara mentioning something about a temporary receptionist while I was signing the lease. She said the regular person was out on medical leave. That must be it. It all fits. Still, it's unsettling. I always say hello. It feels rude not to get a response. I started making a mental note to ask Zara when I see her next. She said she'd be around tomorrow to check on the boiler. It's just a matter of time before everything feels normal. I just need to get used to a building that doesn't instantly acknowledge my existence. It feels less like a community and more like a machine. I should probably get going. I have a student coming over in 1 hour. Lyle, a quiet kid, but bright. He needs help with calculus. It'll be good to have some company. I double-checked the lock on the door, just because it felt solid enough. I was probably just being paranoid about the intercom. It's a new building. I'm new here, and I'm meeting a kid I've only spoken to on the phone. It's normal to be a little on edge. Lyle was late. 10 minutes. Not a massive amount of time, but enough to make me glance at my watch a couple of times. I started to tidy up again. I moved the stack of books and straightened the pens on the desk. That's when I noticed it. A small wooden bird, carved and painted a dull blue. It wasn't mine. I am absolutely certain I don't do little wooden ornaments. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. It was rough around the edges, clearly handmade. I looked around the room, trying to remember if I'd seen it before. Nothing. I hadn't unpacked everything yet. Maybe it was in one of the boxes, but I'd unpacked everything relevant to the living room. I checked the hallway, then opened the kitchen door, scanning the countertops. Still nothing. I started going through the boxes in the bedroom just in case, feeling foolish. It wasn't there. This is ridiculous. Maybe Zara had left it? She'd been up here to give me the keys. Maybe it was a welcome gift, a weird one. But it didn't feel like a gift. It felt placed. I decided to walk to the corner store for a bottle of water, just to get some air. Walking back, I took the long way around, past the building's back entrance, and that's when I saw him, Ursa, standing by the dumpster, looking up at my window. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just watched. I haven't seen Ursa in God 20 years. What was he doing here? I ducked into the building, my throat suddenly dry. Probably just a coincidence, a really unsettling one, but a coincidence. He lives in the city, right? I'm overreacting. I locked the door. Deadbolt chain. Both. It felt dramatic, but Ursa was just standing out there. It wasn't normal. I went through the apartment again, checking the windows. Everything was locked. That bird. I needed to figure out the bird. It was sitting on the bookshelf, just staring. I hadn't put it there. I'd looked everywhere, even the trash. Nobody could have gotten in. Then I heard it. A floorboard creaked. Upstairs, our apartment is on the ground floor. Nobody lives above us. It's storage for the building. I think old boxes, broken furniture. I held my breath. Another creak, closer to the air vent, right above my head. I told myself it was the building settling. Old buildings do that, right? Especially after it rains. It hadn't rained today. I started gathering my things. Laptop, wallet, keys, just in case. I was halfway to the door when I heard a distinct thump, like something heavy dropped. Then a scraping sound, like something being dragged, definitely upstairs, and definitely not settling. I froze. I could hear breathing, slow, ragged breaths coming from above. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't subtle either. Whoever was up there was right above me. I thought maybe it was a squatter, someone living in the storage space. That had to be it, a desperate person that made sense. Then the vent cover came loose. Just a little, but enough to see a sliver of darkness, and a hand, a pale hand reaching down, not grabbing, just resting on the edge of the vent. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just backed away slowly until I bumped into the couch. The hand disappeared. The vent cover clattered shut. I just ran, out the door, leaving everything behind. The police came, of course. 2 officers, young, mostly just wanting to fill out reports. They went over the apartment with flashlights, mostly looking at the vent. Dust, they said. Old building. Probably rats. I told them about the hand, but they exchanged glances. I could see them writing distraught tenant in their notes. They did pull the vent cover completely off and shone the light up into the space above. Nothing. Just emptiness. They asked about Ursa. I described her, the way she always seemed to be watching the building. They took a statement and said they'd increase patrols. It felt performative, like they were doing something to make me feel better. Then the building manager, Lyle, got involved. He was furious about the vent. He said it was a structural issue and he'd had it on the list for months. He unlocked the access panel to the space above, a small door in the hallway. It smelled like stale air and something else, something like old paper. He let the officers in first. I waited. They came out looking uncomfortable. Lyle went in, stayed a few minutes, then came out pale. He kept saying it was just storage, old furniture, boxes. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. The officers asked about previous tenants and how long the space had been unused. Lyle said it hadn't been used in years, not since old man Mort lived here. Mort, that name. I knew that name. He died, Lyle said, before I even moved to the city. Heart attack. But there were records, he admitted, of Mort using the space for hobbies, restoring things. Lyle said he thought maybe Mort had left some of his tools up there. I started to think maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe it was just someone scavenging, a homeless person using the abandoned space. A harmless squatter. I felt a little foolish for being so scared. I should have just called the building manager in the first place. I kept replaying the hand, pale, too pale. It didn't look lived in, and the way it just appeared, not reaching, not grabbing, just there. I started avoiding the living room after dark. I'd eat dinner in the bedroom, watch TV with the volume low. I know, pathetic. Then Zara started asking about my grades. She'd check in every session, not in a supportive way, more like verifying something. It started with math, then moved to history, then even my art project. Things I hadn't even mentioned to her. She'd say, just making sure you're staying on track, with this tight little smile. It felt off. One afternoon, I was looking for old sketchbooks, stuff I'd packed away, and found a box of photos from when I was a kid. And there he was. Obi, my Uncle Obi, standing right next to a much older man who looked disturbingly like Lyle. Not a perfect match, but the same build, the same way he held his head. They were at some kind of craft fair, surrounded by wood carvings. Obi always had a knack for whittling. I figured Lyle must have just looked like someone in Obi's past. Small town. People resemble each other. But then I remembered a story Obi used to tell about a man named Mort who taught him carving when he was a boy. He said Mort had a workshop full of amazing tools and a strange obsession with hidden spaces. I dismissed it. Old people stories. Now I check the smoke detector in every hotel room, every rental. Not to see if it works, but to see if the cover is loose. Just a little. I do it without even thinking, and I call my mom more often. Not to talk about this, never this, just to hear her voice. She always worried about me being too trusting. She was right, of course. She always is. I still remember the chipped formica of that diner table. It was a pale yellow, almost sickly, and had a perfect half-moon-shaped gouge near the salt shaker. I'd been burning the midnight oil, trying to cram for a particularly brutal exam, and had driven out to that all-night place for coffee and a quiet space to review. It was the fall semester of my second year, and I was relying on extra help to get through some of the tougher courses. I figured a few tutoring sessions would be enough to pull everything together. I was really behind in organic chemistry. Professor Birch, he just lectured at you, like we were all supposed to absorb it through osmosis. So I started going to the diner later, trying to get ahead. It was easier to focus when it was empty. That's when pearls started showing up. It wasn't every night, but enough. Always just as I flagged down Ula for another coffee. She'd already be there, in the booth across from mine, and she wouldn't order anything. Just the sugar packets. She'd build these things, perfect little pyramids, then these sprawling webs, all with the pink and blue packets. It was kind of mesmerizing, honestly. I started trying to time it. Like if I waited an extra minute before getting a refill, would she not be there? No luck. And it wasn't like she was staring at me, not exactly. Her gaze was distant, focused on the sugar, but she always seemed to know when I was about to reach for the pot. I figured she was a student too, maybe from the art school down on Elm. Some kind of process art thing. It felt ridiculous to be bothered by it. I mean, people are weird. I started leaving a little extra space between my papers, thinking maybe she liked having something to look past. It felt polite. Then one night, she wasn't building anything with the sugar, just arranging the packets in a straight line. A really long line stretching almost the entire length of the table, and she was looking right at me. Not a glare, not a stare, but an assessment. Like she was measuring something. It felt cold. I quickly looked back at my notes, pretending to be absorbed. When I glanced up again, the line of sugar was gone. She was back to the pyramids, and Ula was asking if I wanted another coffee. Ula refilled my coffee without asking, which she never does unless I look like I'm about to fall asleep face first into my textbook. I thanked her, and she just nodded, wiping down the counter with a practiced flick of the wrist. I tried to focus on organic chemistry, really I did, but every few seconds my eyes drifted back to the booth. She was still with the sugar, but it wasn't pyramids anymore. It was a map, a really detailed map of the streets around campus. I even thought I saw a tiny sugar packet marker where my apartment building was. That's when I decided I'd had enough of the diner. It wasn't even the sugar. Exactly. It was the way she'd look up, just for a split second when I glanced over. Not a startled look, not a curious one, just assessing. Like she was cataloging my reaction. I gathered my things quickly and shoved the textbook into my backpack. I usually walked straight home from here. It was a pretty direct route, but I cut over through the park instead, figuring a little extra distance and a change of scenery would be good. I was halfway across the park when I saw her. Standing by the fountain. It wasn't possible. She hadn't been there when I left the diner. I'd made sure. She was just standing there looking at the fountain, but I knew she'd been watching me. It had to be someone who worked with her. Maybe a friend. They must have talked. Maybe she told someone about the weird girl studying all night. Maybe they were just curious. It was probably nothing. But then I noticed a small pile of sugar packets on the bench beside her, arranged in a line, pointing directly at me. I started to run. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, and even then I triple-locked the door. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every creak of the building, every siren had me bolt upright. I kept seeing those sugar packets. That line, it wasn't just pointing at my apartment. It felt like a marker, like I'd been selected. Around 12 noon, I forced myself to go to the library. I needed to study. I needed to pretend things were normal. I saw Ula at the circulation desk. She gave me a look, a quick assessing glance, then immediately looked away. I thought maybe she'd heard about me running out of the park, that it had somehow gotten around. Embarrassing, but explainable. Then I checked my email. A new message. There was no subject line, just a single sentence. Boyd can help with organic chemistry. Meet me at the diner, booth 6 at 7 p.m. Boyd. The guy from the diner. The one who'd been watching. I hadn't even told anyone I was struggling with organic chemistry. And how did he know I was a student? It was creepy, but also a little tempting. I was failing that class. Maybe he was just being helpful, a weirdly persistent, overly attentive student offering a study session. I shouldn't have gone. I knew I shouldn't have gone, but I did. Booth 6 was empty when I got there. I sat down, scanning the diner. He showed up 5 minutes later, not with textbooks, but with a small, neatly wrapped package. "Just a little something to help you focus," he said, sliding it across the table. It was a box of sugar packets, exactly the same kind as at the diner. My blood went cold. Before I could say anything, a waitress, Selma I think, tripped, sending a tray of drinks flying. The commotion was enough. I stood up, knocking over my chair, and just ran. Out the door, into the street, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away from that booth, from those sugar packets, from Boyd. I went straight to Ula at the library. She was the only one I felt safe around. Not that I knew her, really, just she always seemed to be watching everything, but in a quiet way. Like she noticed things. I told her everything, about the sugar, the diner, the way he kept appearing. I even mentioned Boyd, how he always seemed to be looking at me. Ula listened and didn't interrupt. She just stared. Not at me exactly, but kind of through me. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked me about my classes. Not about what I'd told her, but my classes. Specifically, my history class. She asked who the teaching assistant was. I told her. Birch. She went very still. "Birch," she repeated, slowly. "He volunteers here. Sometimes he shelves books." I hadn't seen him at the library, but that didn't mean anything. It was a big library. Still, it felt like everything was connecting. Birch was the one offering help, the one with the sugar. It had to be. He was probably some kind of obsessive, fixated on students, offering help as a way to, I don't know, get close. It was creepy, but at least I knew who it was. At least I thought I did. Ula said she'd look into it, but she didn't seem particularly concerned. She just directed me to the periodicals section. And then, as I was walking away, I heard her on the phone. "Yes," she said, her voice low. "He's asking about the archives again. He said he needs access to the old student records." Student records. Why would he need those? It didn't fit with the obsessive helper theory. It's been years, I still think about it. Not constantly, not like a trauma loop, but it surfaces. A smell, a certain kind of light, someone standing too close in a queue, and then it's all there again, the feeling of being watched, assessed. I never reported it properly. What could I even say? A man offered me help with calculus, and then things got weird. It sounded ridiculous. I did try to find Birch again after I left school. Facebook, LinkedIn, nothing. It was like he'd vanished. I convinced myself he was just a lonely guy, maybe a bit unhinged, who'd moved on, a pathetic little fixation that burned bright and then fizzled out. That's what I told myself anyway. It made it easier to move on. I tried to find Ula too. She wasn't on any of the college staff lists. It was like she hadn't worked there at all. I started to think I imagined her, that she was some kind of projection of my own anxiety. That felt even stranger. I even went back to the library once, hoping to see her. No one remembered her. I still check people out. Not in a paranoid way, I don't think. But when someone goes out of their way to be helpful, especially if it feels performative, I catalog things. Their shoes, the way they phrase questions, whether they make direct eye contact. It's automatic now. I was at the grocery store last week, and a man offered to help me reach a jar on the top shelf. Perfectly nice, perfectly normal. But I noticed his hands. They were very clean, and he didn't blink much. I took the jar, said thank you, and walked away. And I didn't look back. I never look back anymore.